They say blood is thicker than water, but what happens when your own parents look you dead in the eye and call you a freeloader in the house that you own? I'm Suzanne, and this is the story of how I went from being a struggling single mom trying to help her family to being verbally torn apart by the two people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. What started as an act of compassion turned into a nightmare I never saw coming. And the worst part? I almost let them destroy everything I'd built.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 years ago, I was 26 years old, working double shifts at a tech startup in Austin, Texas, and living in a cramped studio apartment with my 3-year-old daughter, Emma. The apartment was barely big enough for a bed and a crib, but it was ours. Emma's father had left before she was even born, and I'd made peace with the fact that I was doing this alone. My parents, Richard and Carol Bennett, lived 2 states away in a small town in Oklahoma. We'd never been particularly close. They were traditional, religious, and had very specific ideas about how life should be lived. When I got pregnant out of wedlock, their disappointment was palpable. My mother cried for weeks. My father stopped calling me altogether for almost a year. But when Emma was born, something shifted. They softened just a little, enough to send birthday cards and the occasional check for $50. I threw myself into work. The startup I worked for was developing educational software, and I'd started as a customer service representative. But I was hungry to prove that I could make something of myself, hungry to give Emma a better life than the one I'd had, growing up in a house where money was always tight and opportunities were always somewhere else, happening to someone else. Within 2 years, I'd worked my way up to a junior project manager position. The pay increase was significant, but more importantly, I'd caught the attention of the company's founders. They saw something in me, a work ethic that didn't quit, an ability to solve problems creatively, and a willingness to learn everything I could about the business. By the time Emma turned 5, I'd been promoted again. I was making real money for the first time in my life, enough to move out of that studio apartment and into a proper 2-bedroom place in a safe neighborhood with good schools. I started saving aggressively, researching real estate, attending first-time homebuyer seminars on my lunch breaks. The housing market in Austin was insane, but I found a realtor who specialized in helping single parents. She was patient with me, never made me feel stupid for asking questions, and genuinely seemed to care about finding me the right place. We looked probably 30 houses over 6 months. Then we found it. A 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house in a quiet suburb called Cedar Park, just north of Austin. It wasn't fancy. The kitchen was outdated, the carpet was worn, and the backyard was overgrown. But it had good bones, as my realtor kept saying. More importantly, it was in my price range, and the school district was excellent. I remember the day I got the keys. Emma was with me, wearing her favorite purple dress with the twirly skirt. She ran through every room, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors, shouting, "This is ours, Mommy? This is really ours?" I cried. I actually stood in the middle of that empty living room and cried because, yes, it was ours. At 28 years old, I'd bought a house. Me, the girl who got pregnant and dropped out of college, the girl my parents had basically written off as a cautionary tale. I called them that night to share the news. My mother's response was lukewarm at best. "That's nice, dear. Those mortgages are such a burden, though. I hope you know what you're getting yourself into." My father just grunted something about property taxes and got off the phone. Their reaction stung, but I'd learned not to expect much from them. I focused on making the house a home. I painted Emma's room a soft lavender. I bought furniture piece by piece from thrift stores and estate sales, refinishing things myself with YouTube tutorials playing on my phone propped up on a ladder. Work continued to go well. I was managing major projects now, coordinating between developers, designers, and clients. The stress was intense, but I thrived on it. My boss started talking about a director-level position opening up in the next year. Then, about 8 months after I bought the house, I got a call from my mother. It was a Tuesday evening. Emma was doing homework at the kitchen table, and I was making spaghetti. Suzanne? My mother's voice was shaky. We need to talk about your father. My stomach dropped. Is he okay? What happened? He's fine. He's fine. Well, no, he's not fine. We're not fine. She took a deep breath. He lost his job 3 months ago. The plant closed down. We've been trying to manage, but we can't keep up with the bills. We're going to lose the house. I stood there, wooden spoon in hand, sauce dripping onto the stove. 3 months? Why didn't you tell me sooner? We didn't want to burden you. You have your own life, your own problems. But Suzanne, we're desperate. The bank is starting foreclosure proceedings. We've looked into everything. Your father's applied to dozens of jobs, but no one wants to hire a 58-year-old factory worker. I've been doing some cleaning jobs, but it's not enough. My mind was racing. What about retirement savings, the equity in the house? There's nothing left. We had to drain everything during your father's medical issues last year. I'd known he'd had some heart problems, but I hadn't realized how bad the financial situation had gotten. What do you need? I asked, though I already knew where this was going. We need a place to stay. Just temporarily, until we get back on our feet. Maybe a few months, 6 at most. I know it's a lot to ask, and I know we haven't always been... She trailed off. I looked around my kitchen. My safe space. The home I'd worked so hard for. Every instinct told me this was a bad idea. My parents and I had never gotten along. They judged every decision I'd made. They'd made me feel small and inadequate my entire life. But they were my parents. They'd fed me, clothed me, kept a roof over my head growing up. They were losing everything. How could I say no? Okay, I heard myself say. You can stay here.
The relief in my mother's voice was immediate. Oh, Suzanne, thank you. Thank you so much. We'll be the perfect house guests, I promise. We won't get in your way. We'll help with Emma, help around the house. You won't even know we're there. They arrived 2 weeks later in a U-Haul truck packed with furniture, boxes, and all their belongings. I'd cleared out my spare bedroom and half of my garage. My father barely looked at me when I opened the door. My mother hugged me, but it was stiff, obligatory. It's not much, I said, showing them around, but the bedroom is decent-sized and you'll have your own bathroom. My mother's lips were pressed into a thin line as she looked around. The carpet's a bit worn, she observed, and these walls could use a fresh coat of paint. I felt my jaw tighten. I'm working on updating things as I can afford it. My father was already bringing in boxes, his face red from exertion. He didn't say thank you, didn't acknowledge that I was doing them an enormous favor, just started claiming space like it was his right. That first week, I told myself it would be fine. They were adjusting. It was hard for them, losing their independence. I made elaborate dinners, tried to include them in conversations, asked about their job search. But small things started to grate. My mother rearranged my kitchen without asking. "It's just more efficient this way," she said when I couldn't find my coffee mugs. My father took over the living room TV every evening, watching Fox News at volume levels that made conversation impossible. Emma, sweet Emma, tried so hard to connect with them. She'd draw them pictures, ask them to play games. My mother would pat her head absently and go back to scrolling on her phone. My father largely ignored her, unless she was being too loud, at which point he would bark at her to quiet down. I came home from work one day to find my mother had thrown away half of Emma's art projects that I'd had displayed on the refrigerator. "It looked cluttered," she explained. "No one wants to see all that mess." I bit my tongue. 6 months, I reminded myself. They said 6 months. But as those first few weeks turned into the first month, I started to notice something unsettling. Neither of my parents seemed to be actively looking for work. Job applications I'd encouraged them to fill out sat untouched on the kitchen counter. When I'd ask about their search, my father would get defensive. "You don't understand how hard it is at my age. The job market isn't what it used to be." My mother started making comments about my parenting. "Emma needs more structure," she'd say. "You're too permissive with her. In my day, children had chores and responsibilities." Never mind that Emma was 7 years old and already helped set the table and kept her room clean. I was working longer hours than ever, trying to prove myself for that director position. I'd come home exhausted to find my parents comfortable on my couch, eating food I'd bought in a home I was paying for, and somehow I was the one who felt like an intruder. The tension built slowly, like water heating toward a boil, and I had no idea that the worst was still to come.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
3 months in, and the temporary arrangement felt anything but temporary. My parents had settled into my house like they'd always lived there, and the boundaries I'd tried to establish in those early weeks had completely dissolved. I'd wake up at 6 in the morning to get ready for work, only to find my father already camped out in the kitchen, newspaper spread across the entire table, his coffee mug leaving rings on the wood surface I'd just refinished 6 months earlier. He'd grunt a greeting without looking up, and I'd have to maneuver around him to make Emma's breakfast and pack her lunch. My mother had taken to critiquing everything: my grocery choices, my cleaning schedule, the way I dressed for work. "Is that what young women wear to offices these days?" she'd ask, eyeing my blazer and slacks with obvious disapproval. "It seems a bit casual." I was a project manager at a tech company. Business casual was the dress code, but explaining that to my mother was pointless. In her world, professional meant pantyhose and pearls. Never mind that it was 2019 and the workplace had evolved. The financial strain was becoming real. I'd anticipated some increase in utilities and groceries, but I hadn't factored in how much 2 additional adults would actually cost. The water bill had nearly doubled. My mother took long baths every single night. The electric bill was insane because my father kept the thermostat at 68 degrees, even though I'd asked him repeatedly to keep it at 72 to save money. My grocery budget had exploded. My mother had specific dietary preferences: only organic vegetables, particular brands of cereal, expensive cuts of meat. When I'd suggested we stick to a budget, she'd looked at me like I'd slapped her. "We're not asking for caviar, Suzanne, just decent food. Surely you can manage that." I was managing it, but barely. The savings I'd been building for Emma's college fund had stopped growing. In fact, I'd had to dip into it twice to cover the increased expenses. Work was my escape, which was ironic considering how stressful it was. We were in the middle of launching a major product update, and I was coordinating a team of 15 people across 3 different time zones. I'd be on calls until 8 or 9 at night sometimes, and I was grateful for it. Every minute at work was a minute I didn't have to navigate the minefield that my home had become. But that meant I was seeing less of Emma, and the guilt was eating me alive. My daughter, who used to greet me at the door every evening with stories about her day, had become quieter. She'd retreat to her room after dinner, and when I'd check on her, she'd be reading alone, her stuffed animals arranged around her like a protective barrier. One night, I found her crying into her pillow. I sat on the edge of her bed and rubbed her back. "Hey, sweetie, what's wrong?" She was quiet for a long moment, then whispered, "Grandma says I'm too loud. She says I need to act more like a lady and stop running around like a wild animal." My blood ran cold. "She said that to you?" Emma nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "And Grandpa yelled at me today because I was watching cartoons and he wanted to watch his news show. He said my shows were rotting my brain." I held her close, feeling rage build in my chest. Emma was 7 years old. She should be able to watch cartoons in her own home. She should be able to run and play and be a kid without being made to feel like she was doing something wrong.
Listen to me, I said firmly. There is nothing wrong with you. You are perfect exactly as you are. You're kind and smart and creative, and don't let anyone make you feel otherwise, okay? She nodded against my shoulder, but I could feel how small she felt, how diminished. This was exactly what I'd been trying to protect her from her entire life, the kind of criticism and judgment that had marked my own childhood. I decided I needed to have a conversation with my parents, set some ground rules, make it clear that while they were guests in my home, Emma and I still had rights too. I waited until Emma was asleep and approached them in the living room. They were watching television, my father in the recliner that used to be my reading spot, and my mother stretched out on the couch. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. My father muted the TV with obvious irritation. "What now?" "I need us to establish some boundaries. This is my house, and while I'm happy to help you get back on your feet, there needs to be some rules." My mother sat up, her expression immediately defensive. "Rules? We're not children, Suzanne."
I know that. But Emma is a child, and she's been upset. I need you both to stop criticizing her. She's 7 years old. She should be able to be a kid in her own home. My father scoffed. "We're not criticizing. We're trying to teach her some manners, something she's clearly not learning from you." The jab hit its mark, but I pressed on. "And the expenses are getting out of hand. I need you to be more conscious of utility usage, shorter showers, keeping the thermostat at a reasonable temperature, and we need to stick to a grocery budget." My mother's face had gone tight. "So now you're nickel and diming us? Monitoring our shower times? We're your parents, Suzanne, not tenants." "You're also not paying rent," I said, the words coming out sharper than I'd intended, "or contributing to utilities or groceries. I'm carrying all of this on my own, and it's starting to be too much." My father stood up, his face reddening. "We didn't ask to be in this position. Do you think we want to be here, living with our daughter who clearly resents us?" "I don't resent you." "The hell you don't! It's written all over your face. You think you're so much better than us now with your fancy job in your house. You've always thought you were too good for us." "That's not true," I protested. But my mother was standing now too. "Your father lost his job through no fault of his own. We lost everything. And instead of showing compassion, you're here complaining about grocery bills and shower times? Do you have any idea how humiliating this is for us?" I felt the familiar patterns of my childhood closing in, the way they could twist any confrontation until I was the one feeling guilty, the one in the wrong. "I'm just asking for some consideration." "Consideration?" my father barked. "We raised you, we fed you, clothed you, put a roof over your head for 18 years. And this is how you repay us? With complaints and rules?" "I'm not trying to." "We're doing the best we can," my mother cut in, her voice trembling now. "We're looking for work every day. Do you think it's easy at our age? Do you think people are lining up to hire us?" I wanted to point out that I'd seen no evidence of this job search, that the only applications I'd seen filled out were the ones I'd printed and practically forced on them. But the fight had gone out of me. I was exhausted, and they were turning everything around on me like they always did. "Fine," I said quietly. "Just please be kinder to Emma. That's all I'm asking." My father had turned back to the TV, unmuting it. My mother settled back onto the couch. "We're not unkind to Emma. We're preparing her for the real world. Someone has to." I went to my bedroom and closed the door, sat on the edge of my bed, and tried not to cry. I'd bought this house to create a sanctuary for Emma and me, a place where we could be ourselves without judgment. And somehow, in trying to do the right thing, I'd invited the very thing I'd been running from right back into our lives. The next morning, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. I'd left my laptop open on the kitchen counter the night before. It had been moved.
When I opened it, my email was pulled up. Specifically, my work email where I had been discussing the director position with my boss. Someone had been reading my private correspondence. I looked up to find my mother watching me from the doorway, a strange expression on her face. "Quite the promotion you're up for," she said. "Didn't think to mention it to us?" The invasion of privacy should have been my focus, but instead, I found myself on the defensive. "It's not definite yet. I didn't want to say anything until you got it and could lord it over us some more." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Don't worry, Suzanne. Your secret's safe with us." She walked away, leaving me standing there with the sickening realization that things were about to get much, much worse.
The laptop incident changed something fundamental. I started locking my bedroom door at night, keeping my personal documents in my car, changing my passwords. I felt like a paranoid stranger in my own home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my privacy was no longer safe. 2 weeks after that confrontation, I came home to find furniture rearranged in my living room. The couch I'd saved for months to buy had been moved against a different wall. My bookshelf, filled with Emma's baby photos and my small collection of novels, had been relocated to the hallway, making it nearly impossible to walk through without turning sideways. My mother was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables like nothing had happened. "Why did you move everything?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. She didn't look up from her cutting board. "The energy flow was all wrong. The living room faces west, and with the couch positioned where you had it, the afternoon sun was blinding. I'm actually doing you a favor. You should thank me. I liked it where it was, and I'd appreciate if you asked before making changes to my house." Now she looked up, knife still in hand. "Your house. You certainly love reminding us of that, don't you?" "That's not what We're just trying to make this place more livable, Suzanne, more functional. But if you want to be territorial about every little thing, fine. We'll just sit here like museum pieces, not touching anything, not contributing." The word contributing almost made me laugh, but I swallowed the response and went to find Emma. She was in her room, headphones on, hunched over her homework. When she saw me, she pulled the headphones off, and I could see she'd been crying again. "What happened, baby?" "Grandma said my drawing was sloppy. I was making her a picture of flowers, and she said it looked like a kindergartner drew it, and that I need to try harder if I want people to take me seriously." My hands clenched into fists. Emma was in second grade. Her drawings were supposed to look like a child drew them because she was a child. The casual cruelty of the comment, the way my mother seemed instinctively to find the thing that would hurt most, it was too familiar. I held Emma and told her that her art was beautiful, that creativity mattered more than perfection, all the things I wished someone had told me at her age. But I could see the damage being done, day by day, comment by comment. That night, I sent out a group text to some friends I'd made through Emma's school, other single moms who understood the struggle. I needed advice, perspective, anything to help me see this situation clearly. The responses came quickly. "Set a deadline for them to move out. You need to establish firmer boundaries. Girl, they're taking advantage of you." But one message stood out from a woman named Teresa, whose own parents had lived with her briefly. "Document everything. Seriously, if this goes sideways, you'll want a record. Trust me." I thought it was overkill at the time. These were my parents, not adversaries, but something in my gut told me to listen. I started keeping notes on my phone. Date, time, incident. March 15th, 7 p.m. Mom criticized Emma's drawing, made her cry. March 18th, 9:30 p.m. Dad watching TV at volume 45, refused to lower it when asked, said it was his right to enjoy television in peace. The notes painted a disturbing picture, but what concerned me more was a pattern I was starting to notice. My parents were acting less like grateful house guests and more like owners. My father started inviting his old friends over without asking.
I'd come home to find strange men sitting in my living room, drinking my beer, their loud voices filling the house. When I'd pulled my dad aside and asked him to please check with me before having guests, he'd laughed. "It's just a few buddies watching the game. Don't be so uptight. You're turning into one of those controlling women." My mother began making decisions about Emma's schedule without consulting me. She'd signed Emma up for a church youth group at a church I'd never attended, didn't want to attend, and told me about it after the fact. "Emma needs spiritual guidance," she said. "You're raising her without any moral foundation. I'm trying to correct that mistake." "You had no right to sign her up for anything without asking me. I'm her mother." And a poor example of one. Unwed, sleeping around, getting pregnant out of wedlock. What kind of values are you teaching her? The old wounds ripped open so casually. I'd been in exactly one relationship since Emma's father left, and it had ended months ago. But facts didn't matter to my mother. She'd decided who I was years ago, and nothing I did would ever change that narrative. The breaking point of that month came on a Saturday morning. I'd been looking forward to it all week, a rare day off where Emma and I could just be together. I'd planned to take her to the Children's Museum, then out for pizza, maybe catch a movie. I woke up to find Emma already dressed and my mother standing in the doorway of my bedroom.
"We're taking Emma to the 10 o'clock service," she announced. "She needs proper clothes, though. Everything in her closet is too casual. We'll stop by Target first." I sat up, my mind struggling to catch up. "What? No, we have plans today." "Your plans can wait. This is important. Emma's soul is at stake." "Her soul is fine, and you're not taking her anywhere. We've been planning this for a week." My mother's face hardened. "You're being selfish, always putting your wants ahead of what's best for Emma. This is exactly why she needs us here, to provide stability and proper guidance." Something in me snapped. "Get out!" "Excuse me?" "Get out of my room! Emma is my daughter, not yours. You don't get to make decisions about her. You don't get to undermine me, and you sure as hell don't get to tell me I'm a bad mother when I'm the one who's kept a roof over her head her entire life." My mother's eyes went cold. "That roof is looking pretty shaky from where I'm standing. You can barely manage your bills. You're drowning in debt. Emma told me you had to take money from her college fund." Ice flooded through me. I'd explained to Emma very carefully that sometimes we have to borrow from one savings to help another, and that we'd pay it back. I'd framed it as a lesson in financial flexibility. And my mother had weaponized it. "You've been interrogating my daughter about our finances?" "I've been talking to my granddaughter who confides in me because her mother is never around. Someone needs to know what's really going on in this house." My father appeared behind her, attracted by the raised voices. "What's all this shouting?" "Your daughter is having another tantrum, upset because we're trying to take Emma to church." "It's our day," I said, hating how my voice shook. "I planned activities with my daughter, and you're trying to override that." My father crossed his arms. "Maybe if you spent less time at work and more time being a parent, we wouldn't have to step in." "Step in? You're not stepping in. You're taking over. You've been here 4 months, and you've done nothing but criticize, rearrange, and make us feel like strangers in our own home." "Your home," she spat. "Always your home. You know what your problem is, Suzanne. You're ungrateful. We uprooted our entire lives because you offered us a place to stay. You were being foreclosed on. You had nowhere else to go. And we thought we'd raised a daughter who understood family loyalty. But instead, we got you, counting pennies, making us feel like burdens, throwing it in our faces that this is your house." The argument spiraled. Accusations flew. My father brought up every mistake I'd made since high school. My mother cried and said I was breaking her heart. And somehow, once again, I was the villain in a story where I'd started out trying to help. I ended up taking Emma to the museum alone while my parents stayed home. their hurt silence a weapon they wielded expertly. Emma was quiet the whole drive there, and when I asked if she was okay, she said something that broke my heart. "Maybe Grandma is right. Maybe I do need to go to church." "Why would you think that?" "Because she says people who don't go to church end up alone and sad, like you." I pulled into a parking spot and just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel. My 7-year-old daughter thought I was alone and sad. My parents had been poisoning her against me, drop by drop, and I'd been too exhausted and too conflict avoidant to stop it. That night, I made a decision. I started researching tenant rights, eviction processes, legal aid, because Teresa had been right. This was going to go sideways, and when it did, I needed to be prepared. I just didn't realize how soon sideways would arrive.
The 5th month hit me like a freight train. Everything I'd been juggling, work, Emma, my parents, the mounting expenses, started crashing down simultaneously. It started at work. The director position I'd been working towards for over a year was finally being formalized. My boss, Jennifer, called me into her office on a Monday morning with a smile that told me good news was coming. "Suzanne, I'm thrilled to offer you the Director of Product Development position. You've earned this." The board was unanimous. I should have been ecstatic. This was a 40% salary increase, a leadership role, everything I'd been grinding toward. But all I could think about was how my mother had read those emails, how she knew this was coming, and how she was going to react. "There's just one thing," Jennifer continued. "The role requires some travel. Probably 1 week per month, sometimes 2. Industry conferences, client visits, team meetups in our San Francisco office. Is that going to be a problem?" My mind raced. Emma. Who would watch Emma? I'd been relying on after-school programs and the occasional babysitter, but overnight trips, week-long absences? "I have a 7-year-old daughter," I said carefully. Jennifer nodded. "I know, and I want to be clear, we support working parents here. We can be flexible on timing where possible, but the travel is essential to the role. Take a few days to think about it and let me know." I drove home that day with my thoughts spinning. This was the opportunity I'd been dreaming of. The financial breathing room would solve so many problems. But it also meant being away from Emma more, and the thought of leaving her alone with my parents for extended periods made my skin crawl. When I got home, my father was sprawled on the couch eating chips and watching a daytime talk show. The kitchen was a disaster. Dishes piled in the sink, crumbs all over the counter, the trash overflowing. "Did you get the mail?" I asked, setting down my purse. He gestured vaguely toward the dining table without taking his eyes off the TV. I found the mail buried under some of his newspapers. Among the usual bills was a notice from my HOA. A complaint had been filed about my yard. Overgrown grass, weeds in the flower beds, general lack of maintenance. I had 30 days to address it or face a fine. I stood there staring at the letter. Before my parents moved in, I'd kept the yard immaculate. I'd actually enjoyed weekend mornings pulling weeds and trimming hedges while Emma played in the sprinkler. But now, I barely had time to breathe, let alone landscape. "Everything okay?" my mother asked, emerging from the bedroom she shared with my father. She'd clearly just woken up from a nap at 3 in the afternoon. "HOA complained about the yard," I said flatly. She peered at the letter over my shoulder. "Well, that is embarrassing. You really should take better care of the property. It reflects poorly on all of us." The audacity of the statement took my breath away. I've been working 60-hour weeks. Maybe if someone else who was home all day could help maintain the yard? "We're not your servants, Suzanne," my father interjected from the couch. "We're your parents. You're also living here for free. Some contribution would be appreciated." My mother's face flushed. "Contribution? You mean like how I cook dinner most nights? How I've been doing your laundry? How I'm here when Emma gets home from school because you're never around?" I hadn't asked her to do any of those things. In fact, her cooking usually meant using my groceries to make meals she and my father liked, often things Emma wouldn't eat.
And her being home when Emma arrived just meant more opportunities to fill my daughter's head with criticisms of me. I got offered a promotion today, I said, changing the subject because I knew this argument would go nowhere productive. My mother's eyebrows rose. The director position? Of course she knew, because she'd snooped. Yes. And I'm thinking about it. It requires travel. Oh! My mother's expression shifted into something I couldn't quite read. So you'd be gone even more than you already are? Poor Emma. It would mean more money, which would help with everything. I gestured vaguely at the house, at them. Money's not everything, my father chimed in. That's the problem with your generation. Always chasing the next dollar instead of focusing on what matters. Family. Being present. The irony of him saying this while he'd spent 5 months unemployed and making no effort to find work was staggering, but I was too tired to fight. That weekend, I tackled the yard work myself. 4 hours of mowing, trimming, weeding, and bagging under the brutal Texas sun. My parents stayed inside in the air conditioning. When I came in, drenched in sweat and covered in grass clippings, my mother wrinkled her nose.
You're tracking dirt everywhere. Please take your shoes off. I looked down at the floor. There were a few bits of grass. Meanwhile, my father's muddy boots were sitting right inside the front door, where they'd been for 3 days. But I didn't say anything. I just took off my shoes and headed for the shower. The next week, Emma came home from school with a note from her teacher requesting a parent conference. My stomach dropped as I read it. Emma's grades were slipping. She'd been withdrawn in class, not participating in group activities, and had been caught crying in the bathroom twice. I scheduled the conference for the following afternoon and told my boss I needed to leave early. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, was a kind woman in her 50s who'd taught second grade for 20 years. I'm worried about Emma, she said gently. This is a recent change. At the beginning of the year, she was one of my most engaged students. But over the past month or two, she's become almost shut down. Has anything happened at school? Bullying? Problems with other kids? Mrs. Patterson shook her head. Nothing like that. When I asked Emma about it, she said things at home were complicated. I wanted to check in with you to see if there's anything going on that I should be aware of. I explained the situation. My parents living with us, the tension, the challenges. Mrs. Patterson listened without judgment. That's a lot for a 7-year-old to navigate, she said. Children are incredibly perceptive. They pick up on adult stress even when we think we're hiding it. My recommendation would be some counseling. The school has a wonderful counselor who specializes in helping children process family transitions. I agreed immediately. Anything to help Emma. But as I drove home, the guilt was overwhelming. I'd brought my parents into our home thinking I was doing the right thing, and instead I'd created an environment so toxic that my daughter needed therapy. When I got home and mentioned the counseling to my parents, my mother's reaction was swift and sharp. Therapy? For a 7-year-old? That's ridiculous. You're being dramatic. Emma is fine. She's not fine. She's crying at school. Her grades are dropping. Because you're never here, my mother exploded. You're always working, always running around, and that poor child is starved for attention. But instead of actually spending time with her, you want to throw her into therapy so some stranger can fix your failures as a mother. My father stood up, joining the attack. Your mother's right. We've been watching this train wreck for months. You parade around here acting like you're so successful, but you can't even take care of your own kid. Maybe if you'd stayed in a stable relationship instead of sleeping around, Emma would have a father figure. I was in one relationship, I said through gritted teeth. One. And Emma's father abandoned us before she was born. I've been doing this alone. Well, you're clearly not doing it well enough, my mother said coldly. Something inside me fractured. I'd been absorbing their criticisms for months, making excuses, trying to keep the peace, but attacking my parenting, blaming me for Emma's struggle when they were the ones poisoning the atmosphere, it was too much. Get out.
I said quietly. What? My father barked. Get out, both of you. I want you out of my house. My mother's face went pale, then red. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious. You've been here 5 months, you're not looking for work, you're not contributing financially, and you're making my daughter miserable. I want you gone. We have nowhere to go, my mother cried. That's not my problem anymore. I tried to help you. I opened my home, drained my savings, sacrificed my peace, and you've done nothing but make me feel worthless in the one place I should feel safe. My father stepped closer, his face dark with anger. You ungrateful little... Don't, I warned. Don't say something you can't take back. Fine, he spat. We'll leave, but don't come crying to us when your life falls apart. Don't expect any help from us ever again. I never got any help from you to begin with, just judgment and criticism. They stormed off to their room, slamming the door. I stood in the living room, shaking, knowing I'd just crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But I also felt something else. Something I hadn't felt in months. Relief. Or so I thought. I had no idea that the real nightmare was about to begin. I expected my parents to start packing the next morning, maybe to give me the silent treatment, storm around dramatically, make me feel guilty, all the usual tactics. What I didn't expect was for them to act like the conversation never happened. I woke up early to get ready for work, and my father was already in the kitchen making coffee, humming to himself. My mother came out of their bedroom fully dressed, makeup on, smiling pleasantly. "Good morning, Susan," she said brightly. "I was thinking of making a pot roast for dinner. Does that sound good?" I stared at her, confused. "Did you not hear what I said last night?" "Oh, that," she waved her hand dismissively. "You were upset. We all say things we don't mean when we're emotional. It's forgotten." "It's not forgotten. I meant every word. I need you both to find somewhere else to live." My father set down his coffee mug with a loud thunk. "Susan, be reasonable. You can't just throw your own parents out on the street. You have family in Oklahoma, friends. You have options." My mother's pleasant mask slipped slightly. "Those options aren't viable. Your Aunt Margaret's house is too small. Our friends are in the same boat we are, retired, on fixed incomes. You're being cruel. I'm being honest. This arrangement isn't working. You have 60 days to find a place." I grabbed my work bag and headed for the door, but my father's voice stopped me. "Legally, you can't evict us without proper notice. We've established residency here." The words hung in the air like a threat. I turned slowly. "What did you say?" He met my eyes, his expression hard. "We've been here over 90 days. We receive mail here. We've established this as our legal residence. If you want us out, you'll have to go through formal eviction proceedings. That's the law." My blood ran cold. He'd looked this up. They'd both looked this up. This wasn't a casual observation. It was a calculated move. "So that's how it's going to be?" I asked quietly. My mother stepped forward, her voice taking on a pleading tone. "Please don't be angry. Let's talk when you get home. We love you." I didn't respond. That evening, I drafted a formal 30-day notice to vacate. I printed it, signed it, and presented it to my parents at the dinner table. Emma was at a friend's house for a play date, which I'd arranged specifically so she wouldn't witness this. My father read it slowly, then laughed. "You're serious about this?" "Completely." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "How can you do this to us? We're your parents. We gave you life. And I gave you a home when you lost yours. I've given you 5 months of free housing, food, utilities. I've drained my savings helping you, and you've shown me nothing but contempt. We've shown you reality. You don't like hearing the truth about yourself, that you're in over your head, that you're failing at parenthood, that this house is falling apart around you. This house was fine before you got here. My daughter was happy. I was managing. You're the ones who brought chaos." My mother stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Fine. You want us gone? We'll go. But don't expect us to make it easy for you. What does that mean?
She smiled, and it was chilling. It means that if you force us out, everyone will know what kind of daughter you really are. Our church, our friends, your neighbors. We'll tell them how you threw out your elderly parents, how you prioritized money over family, how Emma begged us not to leave, but you didn't care. Emma hasn't begged you to do anything. Not yet, my father said, but she will. Kids are impressionable, especially when they hear how their mother is abandoning her own parents in their time of need. The threat was clear. They were going to turn Emma against me completely. They were going to wage a public relations campaign to paint me as the villain. Do whatever you need to do, I said, keeping my voice steady even though I was shaking inside. But in 30 days, you're leaving. With or without drama. Over the next week, my parents' behavior shifted into something even more disturbing. They stopped being overtly hostile. Instead, they became aggressively pleasant, but only when Emma was around. My mother would cook Emma's favorite meals, help her with homework at the kitchen table, while making gentle comments like, "It's so nice to spend time with you, sweetheart. I'm going to miss this when we're gone." Emma, confused and stressed, started asking questions. Why do Grandma and Grandpa have to leave? Because they need to find their own place, I explained carefully. This was always temporary. But they don't have anywhere to go. Grandma said they might have to live in their car. My jaw clenched. They're not going to live in their car. They're adults with resources. They'll figure it out. But I could see the doubt in Emma's eyes. The seed had been planted. My father started making a show of looking at apartment listings on his laptop in the living room, sighing dramatically. "Everything's so expensive," he'd mutter, loud enough for Emma to hear. "I don't know how we're going to afford first and last month rent plus deposit. Might have to sell the car just to have enough." They were performing poverty, using Emma as their audience, knowing she'd carry the guilt and confusion to me. The school counseling sessions had started, and Emma's counselor, Dr. Mitchell, called me after the third session. "Emma is carrying a lot of adult worries," she said gently. "She's anxious about her grandparents, feeling responsible for their situation. She's also expressed that she feels caught between you and them." "They're manipulating her," I said, "making her feel guilty about a situation that isn't her responsibility." "I understand, and I want you to know that I'm working with Emma on appropriate emotional boundaries. But I also need to ask, is there any way to resolve the situation with your parents that might ease Emma's stress? Not without sacrificing my own well-being and my daughter's long-term mental health." Dr. Mitchell was quiet for a moment. "I support that decision, but I want you to be prepared. Things might get harder for Emma before they get better. Children often act out when they're processing big changes." She was right. Emma started having nightmares. She'd wake up crying, convinced that her grandparents were sleeping on the street in the cold. Never mind that it was Texas and late spring and nowhere near cold. I'd hold her and reassure her, but I could feel her pulling away from me bit by bit. The closeness we'd had was eroding under the weight of my parents' manipulation. At work, I accepted the director position. I had to. The financial pressure was crushing, and I needed every advantage I could get. But the first business trip was scheduled for 2 weeks away, right in the middle of the 30-day notice period. Jennifer was thrilled when I accepted. "You're going to be amazing in this role, Suzanne. This is just the beginning for you." But all I could think about was leaving Emma alone with my parents for 5 days while I was in San Francisco. The thought made me physically ill. I arranged for Emma to stay with my friend Teresa during the trip. I didn't trust my parents not to use my absence as an opportunity to further poison Emma against me. When I told my mother about the arrangement, her reaction was volcanic. "You'd rather leave Emma with a stranger than with her own grandparents? What kind of mother are you?" "Teresa isn't a stranger. She's been Emma's friend's mom for 3 years.
We're her blood, her family, and you're choosing some random woman over us? You've left me no choice, I said. I don't trust you. My father appeared in the doorway, his face red with anger. You're paranoid. You're mentally unstable. Maybe we should be the ones calling child services, reporting that Emma's being raised by someone who's clearly having a breakdown. The threat landed like a physical blow. Child Protective Services. They would actually threaten to take my daughter from me? Get out of my sight, I whispered. Gladly, my father spat. Just 20 more days in this prison. I went to my bedroom and locked the door, sat on my bed and tried to breathe through the panic. They were escalating, threatening, and I had 3 more weeks of this before they had to leave, if they even left at all. The legal notice meant they had to go, but it didn't mean they would. And if they refused, I'd have to take them to court, file for formal eviction, spend money I didn't have on lawyers and court fees. I pulled out my phone and looked at the notes I'd been keeping. Months of documentation. Every incident, every threat, every manipulation. Teresa had been right. I was going to need all of it. Because this was about to get much, much worse.
The San Francisco trip loomed over me like a dark cloud. 5 days away from Emma while my parents were still in the house felt dangerous, even with Teresa ready to take Emma in. I spent the weekend before the trip preparing obsessively, packing Emma's bags, writing out detailed instructions for Teresa, triple-checking that everything was in order. On Sunday afternoon, 2 days before I was scheduled to leave, I came home from grocery shopping to find my parents in the living room with 2 people I'd never seen before. A middle-aged couple dressed in business casual, holding clipboards. "What's going on?" I asked, setting down the grocery bags. My mother stood up, her expression serene. "Suzanne, these are the Hendersons from our church. They're social workers, and we've asked them to do a home assessment." My heart stopped. A home assessment? The woman, Mrs. Henderson, stepped forward with a professional smile. "Ms. Bennett, we're just here to ensure that the living environment is suitable for your daughter. Your parents expressed some concerns, and we want to make sure everything is appropriate." "Concerns? What concerns?" My father gestured around the living room. "The general state of the home, your absence due to work, Emma's recent behavioral issues at school. We're worried about her welfare." This was the CPS threat manifesting. They hadn't called the actual authorities, not yet, but they'd brought in people from their church who could document conditions and potentially escalate to real child protective services. "You need to leave," I said to the Hendersons, trying to keep my voice level. "You have no legal authority to be here, and I don't consent to any assessment." Mr. Henderson exchanged a glance with my parents. "We're not government officials, ma'am. We're simply concerned community members. You're trespassing. I'm asking you politely to leave my property or I'll call the police." My mother's face crumpled. "See, this is exactly what we're talking about. She's hostile, defensive, unreasonable. This is the environment Emma is growing up in. Constant aggression and instability. Out. Now." I pulled out my phone. "I'm counting to 10, and then I'm calling 911. The Hendersons left quickly, clearly uncomfortable with the escalation. But as they walked out, Mrs. Henderson pressed a business card into my mother's hand. "Call us if things get worse," she said quietly. The moment the door closed, I turned on my parents. "How dare you? How dare you bring strangers into my home to investigate me?" "We're trying to protect Emma," my mother said, her voice quavering with fake emotion. "Someone has to." "Protect her from what? From me? I'm her mother. I've taken care of her since the day she was born." "Barely," my father muttered. "You're never here. You work constantly, and now you're shipping her off to some friend's house while you go on a business trip because you can't be bothered to be a parent?" "I'm shipping her to Teresa's because I don't trust you, because you've spent the last month poisoning her against me, manipulating her, using her as a weapon in whatever sick game you're playing." My mother drew herself up. "We've done no such thing. We love Emma. We're trying to give her the stability and guidance you can't provide. In 20 days, you're out. And if you pull anything like this again, I'm getting a restraining order." I grabbed the grocery bags and went to the kitchen, my hands trembling so badly I could barely unpack. Behind me, I heard my mother on the phone, her voice deliberately loud enough for me to hear.
Yes, it was terrible. She threatened us, screamed at us in front of those poor people from the church. I'm genuinely frightened. I don't know what she's capable of anymore. She was creating a narrative, building a case, documenting me as unstable, aggressive, a danger, and I was playing right into it by losing my temper. I forced myself to breathe, to think strategically. I went to my bedroom and called Teresa. They brought fake social workers to the house, I told her, my voice barely above a whisper. People from their church to do a home assessment. Teresa swore softly. That's beyond manipulative. That's calculated. Suzanne, you need to talk to a lawyer, like tomorrow. You can't afford not to. If they're building a case to claim you're an unfit mother, you need legal protection. I'll text you the name of the attorney who helped me with my custody issues. She does payment plans. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed listening to my parents moving around the house, hearing their muffled voices through the walls, wondering what they were planning next. The next morning, I called the attorney Teresa had recommended, Sandra Morrison. Her assistant squeezed me in for a phone consultation during my lunch break. I laid out the entire situation for her, the 5 months of them living with me, the manipulation, the formal eviction notice, the fake assessment. Sandra listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Okay, first thing. Document everything from this point forward. Photos, recordings, if you're in a one-party consent state, emails, texts, everything. Second, do not engage with them emotionally. Keep all communication brief and preferably in writing. They're trying to provoke you into behavior they can use against you. What about the eviction? Will they actually leave when the 30 days is up? Probably not, Sandra said bluntly. People who've gone this far rarely go quietly. You'll likely need to file for formal eviction, which in Texas can take anywhere from 2 to 4 months, depending on the county and their cooperation level. My stomach sank. Months?
I'm sorry. I know that's not what you want to hear. But the good news is that if they try to make a case about Emma's welfare, you have documentation showing you provided them housing out of compassion, that you've been the stable provider and that they've been manipulative. That works in your favor. We talked for another 20 minutes. By the end of the call, I'd retained her on a payment plan I could barely afford, but I needed someone in my corner who understood the legal system. That evening, I sat Emma down for a conversation I'd been dreading. Sweetie, we need to talk about Grandma and Grandpa. Emma's face immediately shuddered. Are you going to say bad things about them? The fact that she'd phrased it that way told me everything about what my parents had been saying to her. No, baby, I'm going to tell you the truth. Grandma and Grandpa are going to be moving out soon. They need to find their own place. Because you're kicking them out. Because this was always meant to be temporary. They came to stay with us while they got back on their feet, and now it's time for them to go. Emma's eyes filled with tears. But Grandma said they don't have any money. She said you're making them leave even though they have nowhere to go. I wanted to scream. Instead, I kept my voice calm. That's not true, Emma. They have options. They have family in Oklahoma. They have friends. Adults are responsible for finding their own housing. Then why can't they just stay here? We have room. Because, how did I explain toxic dynamics to a 7-year-old? Because sometimes people don't get along, even in families, and everyone is happier when they have their own space. I'm not happier, Emma said, her voice breaking. I like having them here. They help me with homework and make me snacks and talk to me. You're always working. There it was. The poison had taken root completely. I work to provide for us, Emma, to keep this house, to buy food and clothes, to give you a good life. I don't care about stuff. I just want you to be home. She ran to her room and slammed the door. I sat there on the couch, feeling like I'd been hollowed out. My parents had won this round. They'd successfully positioned themselves as the caring grandparents, and me as the absent workaholic who was tearing the family apart. The next day was Tuesday, the day I had to leave for San Francisco. I packed while my parents made a show of being devastated.
My mother hugged Emma for a long time at the door, whispering things I couldn't hear but could guess. "Remember, sweetie, Teresa's house is very nice, and your mom wants you to stay there, but you can call us anytime you want. We're always here for you." The implication was clear. I was choosing to separate Emma from them, not the other way around. Teresa picked Emma up while I was loading my suitcase into the car. I hugged my daughter tight, but she was stiff in my arms, already pulling away emotionally. "I love you so much. I'll call you every night." She didn't respond. The 5 days in San Francisco were professionally successful, but personally torturous. The conference went well, the client meetings were productive, and my new team seemed genuinely excited to work with me. But every night when I called Emma, the conversations were stilted and brief. She had answered Teresa's phone with one-word responses, clearly heard that I'd left. On the third night, she mentioned casually that Grandma had called her. "What did she say?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Just that she missed me, and that she was praying I'd be okay." Praying I'd be okay. Like I was in danger. Like being with Teresa was some kind of ordeal. When I got home on Saturday, exhausted from travel and emotionally drained, I walked into a nightmare. My parents were hosting a gathering. There were at least a dozen people in my living room. Church friends, former neighbors from Oklahoma, people I'd never met. They'd used my absence to throw what looked like a party. Music was playing, food covered my kitchen counters, food they'd bought with what money I had no idea. People were drinking, laughing, completely at home in my house. I stood in the doorway, suitcase in hand, and my father noticed me first. He smiled widely. "Suzanne, you're back! Everyone, this is my daughter. She's been away on business." A dozen strangers smiled at me, and I realized what this was. This was them demonstrating residency, showing all these witnesses that this was their home, that they had friends over, that they belonged here. My mother came over, kissed my cheek like we were the perfect family. "You must be exhausted from your trip. Why don't you go rest? We'll keep it down." I looked around at my house, invaded by strangers, my parents playing host in a house they didn't own and were legally required to leave in less than 2 weeks. And I finally understood. They weren't planning to leave at all. They were planning to make me the one who had to go.
I didn't go to my room. I didn't rest. I stood in that doorway and made a decision that would change everything. "Everyone needs to leave," I said clearly, loudly enough to cut through the music and conversation. The room went silent. A dozen pairs of eyes turned to me. My father's smile didn't waver. "Suzanne, don't be rude. These are our guests." "In my house," I interrupted, "which you don't own, which you were served legal notice to vacate. You have 13 days left, and I will not have strangers in my home without my permission." My mother's face flushed. "Honey, you're tired. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking perfectly clearly." I turned to the confused guests. "I'm sorry for the awkwardness, but this gathering wasn't authorized by me, the homeowner. I'm going to have to ask all of you to leave." People started gathering their things, murmuring awkwardly. Some shot my parents sympathetic looks. Others just wanted out of the uncomfortable situation as quickly as possible. My father stood up, his chair scraping loudly. "You're embarrassing us. These people drove hours to see us." "Then you should have asked permission before inviting them to a home you're being evicted from." One of the guests, an older man, paused near the door. "Richard, Carol, is this true? You're being evicted?" My mother's eyes filled with tears on cue. "Our daughter is going through something. She's not herself. We're trying to be patient with her." "I'm standing right here," I said flatly. "And I'm completely myself. They've been living here rent-free for 5 months, refusing to look for work, manipulating my daughter, and now refusing to leave when asked. That's the truth." The guests left quickly after that. When the last person walked out, I closed and locked the door, then turned to face my parents. "That was unforgivable. You humiliated us. You humiliated yourselves by throwing a party in someone else's house without permission.
But more than that, you've been working every angle to avoid leaving. The residency claims, the fake assessment, turning Emma against me. I see exactly what you're doing." My father stepped closer, his face dark with anger. "You want to know what we're doing? We're surviving, because you clearly don't care what happens to us. I gave you 5 months of my home. I drained my savings. I sacrificed my peace and my daughter's well-being. How is that not caring?" "You're throwing us out," my mother shrieked. "Your own parents, out on the street with nothing?" "You have 13 days to find somewhere to go. That's more than most people would give after what you've pulled." "We don't have anywhere to go," my father said, his voice dropping to something cold and menacing. "So we're not leaving. Sue us. Evict us. Drag us through court. We'll make it so expensive and so public that everyone will know what kind of person you really are." There it was. The real plan, finally out in the open. Fine. We'll do it that way. I went to my bedroom, locked the door, and called Sandra Morrison. It was Saturday evening, but she'd given me her cell for emergencies. This qualified. "They're refusing to leave," I told her. "They just admitted they're planning to drag out the legal process as long as possible." Sandra sighed. "Okay. Monday morning, we file for formal eviction. I'll prepare the paperwork tonight. In the meantime, document everything. The party, the admission that they're refusing to leave, all of it. And Suzanne, brace yourself. This is going to get ugly." Sunday was a Cold War. My parents stayed in their room most of the day, emerging only to make pointed comments about packing up their meager belongings and having nowhere to store them. Emma came home from Teresa's withdrawn and quiet. I tried to talk to her, to explain, but she'd shut down completely. That night, I heard her crying in her room again, and when I went to comfort her, she turned away from me. "I want to live with Grandma and Grandpa," she whispered into her pillow. My heart shattered. "Baby, that's not possible. I hate you," she whispered. I stood there in her doorway, those 3 words echoing in my head. My daughter hated me. The person I'd sacrificed everything for, worked myself to exhaustion for, the center of my entire world, hated me. I closed her door quietly and went to my room, sat on my bed, and finally let myself cry. Not quiet tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place of absolute despair. But somewhere in that breakdown, something shifted. I'd been so focused on being the peacemaker, on trying to make everyone happy, on absorbing the abuse to keep things calm, and it had gotten me exactly nowhere. My parents weren't going to suddenly become grateful or kind. Emma wasn't going to understand the situation until she was much older. There was no way to navigate this that would make me the hero of the story. So I had to stop trying to be the hero. I just had to be the parent, the homeowner, the woman who set boundaries and enforced them, even when it hurt. Monday morning, Sandra filed the eviction paperwork. The formal process had begun. When the sheriff's deputy arrived to serve my parents with the court summons, my mother wept dramatically. My father called me every name in the book. The deputy, a woman in her 40s who'd clearly seen this before, remained professional. "You have a court date in 2 weeks. I suggest you find legal representation." After she left, my father turned on me with pure venom in his eyes. "You'll regret this. We'll fight you every step of the way. We'll make sure Emma knows exactly what kind of mother she has." "Do your worst," I said, and I meant it. I'm done being afraid of you. The next 2 weeks were hell. My parents made good on their promise to make things difficult. They filed a countersuit claiming I owed them back compensation for childcare services they'd provided. They contacted my workplace claiming I was unstable and shouldn't be working with children's educational software. They posted on social media about being cruelly evicted by their ungrateful daughter. But I had Sandra, and I had documentation. Months of detailed notes, photos, recordings of their threats, text messages proving they'd never looked for work, bank statements showing I'd covered everything while they contributed nothing. The court date arrived. My parents showed up with a free legal aid attorney who clearly hadn't had time to prepare adequately.
Sandra presented our case methodically. The initial agreement for temporary housing, the formal notice to vacate, their refusal to leave, the harassment, and manipulation. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, listened to both sides. My parents' attorney tried to argue that they'd been contributing to the household, that this was a family dispute that should be mediated. But when Sandra presented the evidence, the documentation of their threats, the fake assessment, the manipulation of Emma, the admission they planned to drag out the process, the judge's expression hardened. "This isn't a landlord-tenant dispute," she said. "This is exploitation of familial goodwill. Miss Bennett provided housing out of compassion, and you've weaponized that generosity." She ruled in my favor. My parents had 7 days to vacate the premises. If they refused, law enforcement would physically remove them. My mother sobbed in the courtroom. My father glared at me with such hatred I actually felt afraid. But it was done. 6 days later, they waited until the last possible moment. A moving truck appeared. My parents loaded their belongings in silence. No goodbyes, no apologies, just cold fury radiating from them both. As the truck pulled away, my father rolled down the window. "You've lost your daughter," he called out. "Emma will never forgive you for this." Then they were gone. The house felt eerily quiet. I walked through each room, seeing it clearly for the first time in months. The furniture back in its proper places, the thermostat at a reasonable temperature, my refrigerator organized the way I liked it. It felt like mine again. Emma struggled. For weeks, she barely spoke to me. She cried for her grandparents, asked when she could see them, blamed me for everything. But slowly, with Dr. Mitchell's help and consistent, patient love from me, things began to shift. The nightmare stopped. Her grades improved. She started smiling again. One night, 3 months after my parents left, Emma crawled into my lap while we were watching a movie. "Mama," she said softly. "Yeah, baby? I'm glad it's just us again." I held her close, tears streaming down my face. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." My parents tried to maintain contact at first. Calls Emma wouldn't take, gifts she refused to accept. Eventually, they stopped trying. I heard through extended family that they'd moved in with my mother's sister in Oklahoma. I never heard from them directly again. The experience changed me fundamentally. I learned that compassion without boundaries is self-destruction, that you can't sacrifice yourself to save people who don't want to be saved, that sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who claim to love you. I also learned that I was stronger than I'd ever known, strong enough to stand up to the people who raised me, strong enough to fight for my daughter and my home, strong enough to rebuild after everything fell apart. Emma's 12 now. She's thriving, confident, creative, happy. We talk about that time in her life sometimes. She understands now, in the way only maturity can bring, what really happened. And me? I'm still in that house, still in that director position, still building the life I'd envisioned before everything went sideways. But now I know something I didn't know then. Home isn't just a place. It's a feeling of safety. And sometimes protecting that feeling means being willing to fight for it, even against your own blood. My parents screamed in my face that Emma and I were freeloaders in the house I owned, that I'd opened to them out of love. But in the end, I was the one who learned the most important lesson. You can't freeload on someone's compassion forever. Eventually, the bill comes due.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.